folks that we're still struggling with the virus here, and we need to remember them in our prayers. That is the McAnallys, the Whites, Minnesota Shed, and there's several others in our congregation that have had have either in quarantine or tested positive for these other things. So we need to remember these folks in our prayers also. And seemed like there was one other thing I was going to announce, but I don't remember what it was. So, without any farther, before we go any farther, Mr. True, would you mind leading us in prayer?
Let's pray. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day and for the opportunity we have to come and study and portion of our word. Father, there are many in our thoughts and minds tonight that are needing care as they have gone through illness or lost loved ones. We just pray that you will care for them and put your hand on them and give them whatever they need. Father, as we go through tonight, we just ask that you be with Sean, and he has a steady recollection of what he has studied, and that we can use what's given to us tonight using our everyday lives. Father, go with us as we depart here tonight and watch over us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brad. Okay, I remember who it was.
I did. What about Paul Pierce? Have you ever made any arrangements or anything that they're going to do?
No, I don't know. I don't think they have made any arrangements yet, John. They haven't made any arrangements of what is going to take place with Paul. I knew who I was thinking of. I was thinking of I was thinking about Gina Kelso.
No.
Tina Kelso. Sorry, that's an easy mistake. Yeah, Tina Kelso. She is. That is the aunt of Lauren. True. Rhymes. Dylan's wife. I get it. Believe it. Last I heard, she's doing a little bit better. I mean, there's still she's got a long way to go, and she's still way deep in the woods. So we need to remember her in our prayers also. I knew there was somebody else that.
Sean, also Jack Bishop is the uncle of Shauna.
Yeah, I said that.
I thought you just said Caroline.
No, I said Caroline's also came to him, but it's Shauna's uncle. Yes. So is there anything else before we get started? Okay, let us go to, we got through part of verse 11, or verse 12, but let's start in verse 12 and read again down through verse 18, and we'll go through these tonight.
Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created.
Thank you, Jordan. Okay. We have started, like I said, a little bit in verse 12 last week, and we had asked a few questions, and it's really odd. Somebody asked me the question last week. They asked me a question, and they asked me after class. And we had been talking about this verse of where it says, and I don't know if you ever noticed this, But this is like one of the Beatitudes here. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trials. So not all the Beatitudes are in Matthew chapter 5. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as a little bit of knowledge, Bible trivia for you there. But he tells us that, and we were talking about, are we really a follower of Christ if we don't persevere trials, and we don't persevere through things in this life, and we have no struggles? And we talked about that up in verse 2. But this question was asked of me last week, and they texted to me this week because they are not here tonight. So my question was, can you mature as a Christian without trials? Sometimes we think of trials as just temptations or tragic events, but trials can come in personal forms that only ourselves and God know about, and others do not often see. With any trial, God always wants us to draw closer to Him and realize that He is our strength. So, that's the question. Can we mature as a Christian that we need to be if we don't go through these trials? Because the Bible talks about how did they try gold? Through what?
Through the fire.
Through fire. They try gold through fire, and if there's any impurities or any dross, what happens to it? It rises to the top, and then you can tell the difference between the pure gold and the other. So that was the question that was posed to me. Can we really become as mature of a Christian as we need to be, as we should want to be, if we don't go through these trials and these things? So I want to say, and in that, Miller, could you put up Hebrews chapter 12, please? Hebrews 12, 5 through 7. Joey, can you read that off there?
Mm-hmm. And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when He rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one He loves, and He chastens everyone He accepts as His son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as His children, for what children are not disciplined by their father?"
Thank you, Joey. That one part of verse, I think it's probably verse 7, where it says, endure hardship as discipline. When he talks about trials in this verse 12, when he says, the man who perseveres under trial, would we consider, and this is a question, because it's a question that I struggle with, is this what James is talking about? And I know that he's talking to those people that are scattered throughout because they're going through persecution, but also these, could some of these, I guess that these related. This part of this verse right here and these trials, it says endure hardship as discipline. Are they hooked together? Can you elaborate? I mean, I'd like you to help seriously.
Well, if God loves us, we are going to be disciplined by Him.
Correct. I'll agree with that.
And if He doesn't discipline us, then that doesn't love us. And I think that's just true with humans. We want the children that we love, we do what's necessary to try to discipline them in love and show them the right things and keep them from getting in trouble and all that. And sometimes we have to get strict with them. And But that's the same way that God does us, as his followers. And, because he knows we step out of line, and we're tempted, we do things we shouldn't do. And, he should call us down one way or another. And his word, of course, is the main discipline to us. And things that we help each other with too. Galatians chapter 6 is great about that, and working with each other. But yeah, there's no way that a true Christian follower of God is going to go and not be disciplined one way or another, and be in trials. We're all going to be. And it seems like the more that we're called to his purpose, the more Satan is going to throw things up at us and make it hard for us. And we should expect that. But we can get through it. We can do it. And the more we get through it, the stronger we get.
So, that is, so what I hear is they're not mutually exclusive. They're not every time that we endure discipline from God, it's the same as the trial that we're going through that James is talking about here, but it could be.
It could be.
Yeah, it could be. Does that sound right? Connie made that face. Yeah. Like I ain't sure.
Well, I'm just, going through something in my head, it says, we're not tempted of God, but he disciplines us, so I'm trying to separate the two, because to me they're a little bit different. Trials aren't caused by God, but if we get out of line, he disciplines us. I guess is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, trials are not always.
Yeah, trials are not from God, but if we get out of line, then he puts us back in line. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That was the face. That was something else.
And you were gonna say, Diane?
I agree with Connie. Trials are not always discipline. Sometimes we have to go through things that we didn't really misbehave and need to be punished for. In that sense of rebuking and being, being disciplined in that respect. Discipline can also be not for something done bad. It can just be raising your child the way that's discipline as well to me.
Well, and that's what I was thinking. When I was thinking, I wasn't necessarily thinking, Connie, of you did something wrong and God's going to straighten you out. He's going to, swat you and put you back on the path. Sometimes it's what Diane just said. Sometimes that discipline is, I put it like this. Brian, when you made your guys run, and when you made them do, when they're out there running exercise, they're football. Do what? But like when you did that during football, and that's to build character, that's to build discipline. It's not necessarily punishment, but that is, you're building discipline in these people to make them, to prepare them better.
To endure the trials.
Huh?
To endure the trials.
Yes, to endure those trials. But it's also trials because I guarantee you when you're out there running them, whatever you're doing.
Thinking it's not worth anything, but in the end, it's in the fourth quarter of the ball games when you still have stamina and everybody else is more played out.
And you're more mentally prepared because you in better shape and you're that way. That's that discipline that comes along with, that's that endurance that comes along with the discipline that you have received. But it's trials because when you're in the middle of those running, Derek can tell you, when you're in the middle of those runnings and doing those crabs and doing all that stuff, it feels like you're being punished. And I guess that's kind of the direction I was thinking when I asked that question.
I have a side note. It says trials are, however, the means through which God's blessings can come. One's endurance and victory over trials brings God's blessings.
Yes. And he tells us that all things, and this is a struggle sometimes, it's hard to understand. It says God works, all things for good that love him. And when you go through some of those things and some of those things happen, and you think, how can that be? But if you can see, and that's the whole thing, that God's God and we're not. We see here, and God sees the whole picture, and he sees the whole thing, and he sees that, yes, this will be something that you might not ever understand, but you might be able to, someone might be able to lean on you one day. Judy.
We have and the teachers will recognize we have kind of a catchphrase in education called productive struggle. And that's where you let kids, and at the time they think it's awful and they're crying and they're carrying on, but you let them struggle with learning something because you know it's gonna produce greater at the end, because once they get through that, they learn on their own and they are stronger, better student. But, when you're in the middle of it, it's like you said.
It feels like a trial.
It's awful, and they don't understand why we're not. Why don't you just help me? Why don't you just tell me? But, you gotta let them have that productive struggle in order to help them grow.
I think we can probably move on now. Because I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at. That when God does that for us, they are trials. They don't necessarily have to be from that, but like you're talking about, that is productive. But when you're going through it, it's a trial. It is. So yes, that was good. That's what I was trying to say. So, all right, we're good with that. Because I think that's just so important that we understand that if we're walking in the light and we go through these trials and we have these things that we have to persevere, that we know God's going to be there. He's there with us. And sometimes, when you're there, it's just really tough. It's really tough to see that. But if we can keep that as our focus, to focus on that.
And Sean, when you go through those trials, there's going to be somebody else go through those same trials, and you're going to be there to help them when they do. And that's part of your training, I think, is to being able to go through your trials and then help somebody else do the same thing. You may wonder, why am I going through this? And then next thing you know, somebody else is coming to you for help or advice, and I think we owe to pay it back, pay it forward, helping with that.
Yes.
1 John chapter 1 verse 7. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what Diane's talking about, yes. And by the way, that's one of my most favorite verses. But Diane, I think that's exactly right. Because we're having fellowship with one another. We're there for one another. And I'm telling you, that's why I preach this over and over and over and over. And if I had my soapbox, I'd stand on it. That's why this tonight. That's why this tonight is so important. That's why church is so important. Because we can have fellowship with one another. We can lean on one another. We can depend on one another. We can be there for one another. And if you're not there and you're watching it on TV, and I'm not knocking people who watch it on TV, I'm not. But you don't have that same interaction that me and Joey can have. Well, maybe I picked somebody's fights, Joey. Joey knows. See, that's my whole point. I can say those things to Joey and hear it like this, and he knows that I love him. Yeah. I know you could.
Well, I just, in the last week, I had 3 of my teachers who lost a parent. And, they could come to me and I could say, I know. When they didn't feel like maybe their person next door or whatever it is, because I just say,
Yeah.
Because of the struggle I went through, I felt like not only helped them, because they felt like somebody understand, but it also made me a better person as their boss, because I could be empathetic, sympathetic to them, and say, you do what you need to do, you need to leave, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me back, and we'll move on after this. This leads me back to that question. Can we be the mature Christian that we should be if we don't go through trials?
Can I read you something?
Yes, please.
This is kind of like what I'll admit, it's kind of a side note, but basically it says trials have the capacity to bring strength, maturity, courage, genuine love, righteousness, and perseverance to those who are willing to be trained.
Willing.
Willing.
That's a real good point.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been thinking. When I think of a child, you encounter a child, which means you're growing, you're moving. And discipline is making a disciple of. So there's structure there. And, it's not always discipline, but like, we think of it like a punishment.
Right.
It's like making a disciple of and training. And if you're not doing training, you don't have trials, you're almost not doing it right. Because you're not growing.
That's what I had in my head when I was thinking this the first, last week or whenever it was I was talking about it. It is that very thing, because if you're not growing and doing that, you won't be going through those trials. And sometimes that's one other reason I like this class, is because things in my head don't come out of my pie hole like I think in my head they are.
Sean, those words I just read too, there's not a word in that sentence that wouldn't be positive to somebody's everyday life.
Yeah.
It's just so much positivity. I mean, that's what kind of caught my eye when I read it. I had to back read it 3 or 4 times without.
Yeah, and Joey, that's the thing about it. Our trials can be positive for other people. That's what Diane was talking about a minute ago.
And people look at how we deal with it too.
Yes, that's exactly right. Because it says, Connie, it says, when tempted, no one should say, God tempted me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But with each temptation, a person of his own evil desire is dragged away and enticed. And there's another version that says he's drawn away. He's drawn away from his, on the straight and narrow, and he's drawn away by his own lust. And then it talks about, and after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when fully grown, gives birth to death. And in Romans 6:23, what does Paul say about if you sin, then you live in sin, you're going to get paid by how? That's right, its wages are death. So if you live in sin, your payday is going to be death.
John, that's the heading of that chapter. It says dead to sin, alive in Christ.
Yeah. We're dead to sin and alive in Christ. And this death we're talking about is not talking about leaving this earth death. We're talking about our spiritual death within that. And there's a lot to be said that, and the reason I said you're drawn into that, I think about, or lured into it, I think about when you're fishing. Every time you cast out your bait, you throw it where you don't just randomly throw it out there somewhere. You see a stump, or you see a dock, or you see something that you think in your graph that, hey, there could be a fish there, and you throw your bait out there. And when you throw it out there, you throw it in the what you think is a good target zone. And what you're trying to do is you're being Satan is what you're doing with those fish. You ever thought about it? Because are you not? You're throwing that bait out there and you're trying to entice them to leave their safety of where they're at and grab a hold of what you have offering them, and then you Buddy, you got them hooked and you reel them in. I thought about that the other day when I read that. And I thought that, you know, I know that I'm going to get some smirks and some looks, but I thought that was a pretty good analogy.
Well, it is, because just think about it, when you go fishing, you use a certain kind of bait for a certain kind of fish you want to catch. And Satan knows just what bait to use for us. It's not the same for you as it is for me.
Thank you, guys. Now, y'all turn around and laugh at her. That's right. Libby, give me something. I mean, I don't come up with stuff very often. Especially that I thought was actually pretty good.
But you know, in all of that, of course, Bishop probably wouldn't know, but in all of that, we as humans have that choice to turn away from it or to drink. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So they can swim the other way.
That's true.
Yeah.
You fish finder, you just walk around.
Yeah. Very same principle. Very same thing. We're enticed away by just what Diane said. There are things that are going to entice, they entice me different than they would Jay Phillips. There are things that are going to be, that are going to affect me that are not going to affect Mr. George, and vice versa. And Satan knows that. But it goes back to what it says. We want to say, how many of y'all guys, boy, I'm going to date myself here. How many of y'all guys remember Flip Wilson? That's exactly what he used to say. Flip Wilson used to say, the devil made me do it. And that's what we want to do sometimes. Sometimes in life, that's what we want to do. The same thing what Libby just talked about. What did Adam say to God, and what did Eve say? Adam said, "This woman you gave it to me," and then the woman said, "The serpent tricked me." And guess what? They're saying the devil made me do it. But it goes back to what Belinda just said. We always have that choice. So now he tells us, anything else on that before I go farther? In verse 17, he tells us that every good and perfect gift comes from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights. The guy that made all the, the Lord that made all the lights, the firmament, the sun and the moon and all of this stuff. Now, you know what I think is, and no doubt, every good gift that we have, everything that we have, goodness, life, God gives it to us. But you know what I think the coolest thing about this verse is? He tells us that God never changes. He's never changed. He's always the same. And He's the same God that, and if you stop and think about this, let's stop and think about this for a second. This same God that James is talking about, and the same God that we pray to, the same God that's in this room right now, the same God that we worship, is the very same God that breathed creation with a breath. The very same one. You know what that means? He's the very same. He never changes. And I just think that's something that we should give us comfort. It should give us peace to know that we worship a God that is always the same. And He considers us what He says that we can be, because He gives us that opportunity that we're like first fruits. His first fruits that He created of all. So, I just thought that was a really cool part of that verse. Anything on 8, down through 17, 18? Now, Millard, you got 19? If you go 19 through 22, we'll read those and go.
My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you.
All right, stop there, Joey. I'll stop you. Because that just right here is a mouthful. And I know it's been said, and we can blow past this pretty quick. But he says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I read something this past week, and everybody has heard this before, that God gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should listen twice as much as we should talk. But you know what else he did that I didn't register with me, because I've heard that old saying before? I know you listen to my wife and my daughter, and they'll tell you that I can't hear. So they tell me, but normally, your ears are always what? Open and listening, right? What's between your tongue and the world? He gives us the ability. See this right here? Your jawbone. He gives us the ability to be able to shut that thing and keep it shut. And you have 3 lines of defense before you ever say anything. You have your jaws that you can shut your mouth. You have your teeth that you can clench, and you have your lips that you can keep shut. So you don't say anything. And I thought, when I read that, I thought, I never thought about that. Not only does he give us 2 ears that are always open, he gives us a mouth that has 3 lines of defense before our tongue starts flapping. And I think that that's not on purpose. Because most of the time, I put it like this right here. I have an acquaintance, he's a friend, that when I talk to him, and I haven't talked to him in a while, I used to work with him, but when you talk to him, you could tell he wasn't paying attention to what you were saying. You could tell he was thinking about what he was going to say. He was thinking about his response to you, and not really, he was hearing you make noise, but he wasn't listening to what you were saying. So he already had his mind made up in his response, and he was thinking of it, trying to get it, and he could barely wait for you to be quiet so he could get started. That's not what he's talking about. If we will listen, and we will have open discourse with one another, a lot of problems can be solved if we can do, and I'll talk about this anger part. I don't know how much time we have, because, is that the first one, Miller?
Yeah.
It says in Proverbs, it said, sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongue. In other words, the more you talk, most of the time, when you're in a situation like that, the more you say, the worse you get. The deeper the hole gets. If we have open, like I said, discourse with one another, and we listen, we might actually be able to come, and not that you'll ever always agree. And that's okay to agree to disagree. But you can agree to disagree and be civil about it, and be where you, and because it talks about the next part of it down. I think talking a lot of times is what gets us in trouble. But then when it goes down to the next thing, and the next part of it, it says, and becomes slow to become angry. And you've heard it all the time. It says, be angry and sin not. I literally want to see a show of hands. How many of us in here are good at that?
Getting angry or slow?
No, being angry and sinning not. How many of us are really good when you get mad that you don't say things you wish you hadn't said? And sometimes I don't know that that's, you know. But a lot of times, it's there again, Libby. A lot of times, it's by our actions. It's by our actions that we. It's as bad as saying something. It's when we just don't say anything, or when we act a certain way. My wife will tell me when we go somewhere and do something, and she said, "You were ugly." I said, "Well, not say a word." She said, "You don't have to." She said, "It's rubbed all over your face, and it's rubbed all over you. You can tell by the way you." I'm like, "That's not right." But the point is, Betsy's pointing, Joey. But
We'll talk.
I decided to order the mask and sunglasses.
But that part of that anger, this part of this verse, the anger part, I did some research on it. Yeah, do we have anybody to ring the bell?
I don't think there's anybody here that knows more than I do.
To what? No.
Well, the last person that worked was a.
Well, Workman's back there on the.
Oh, he's back there?
Yeah, he's back there on the cameras. He's on the cameras, but you probably need to go ahead and ring it. Okay. Or just come up here and yell at him over one class. Oh, that's right, Cody's back there. Cody's upstairs. I read this about anger because I was thinking, what makes us angry? Why, when you read this verse, it says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. What makes us angry? When we don't get our way. Selfishness. That's our self. This is the three things. There's more than that. There's a bunch of things that I read that will cause us to be angry. It's like a narcissist. Boy, I'm telling you. Do you want to do that? There you go. Narcissistic person. When you talk to somebody like that, they become angry because if you disagree with them, because they think they're the smartest person in the room. They're the smartest person anywhere they go. So that's what, that's one of the things you think. That's the deal. But I'll tell you what, y'all go this week and this next week and think about what makes you angry and how you can help yourself. And we'll talk about some more about that part of it. Because I had some interesting things that I found out. So that'll be it for tonight. And I will, before we close, I'll ask Sam and Phil lead us in a closing prayer, and we'll be done for the night.
Father, dear Father, I come before you this evening to just to give thanks, Father. Give thanks for such a beautiful day, Father. Give thanks for this time that we're able to spend together, Father. Although it's smaller than usual, it's still healthy, Father. And I thank you for that, Father. I pray that you keep this church safe, that you watch over all the people that part of this congregation that are sick, Father. All the people that you mentioned before class tonight. Just pray that you do. Put your hands up on Father and comfort them, and especially the families as they're having to deal with it too. Keep us safe as we go throughout this week, and let us return on Sunday. Forgive us for our sins, and thank you so much for your Son that gave us life. It's through His name I ask this prayer. Amen.
Thank you.